Welcome to the Leadership Roundtable, a podcast with Dr. Conway Edwards, where we get together and talk about how we can all expand our leadership capacity. We want to thank you for joining us today. Please follow along on our webpage. Visit 1cc.com/leadership roundtable. You'll be able to download the notes and follow along with what we're talking about on today's podcast. Dr. Conway Edwards, we're here today. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing good. I had a little break, like 2 days, after a really tough weekend and a really tough season of Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and our solemn assembly. But we're here, so we're grateful to God for it.
Coming up within a week is something important for everybody to know about. Climb Conference.
I promise you don't want to miss it. You want to register if there's still room to register. You want to register for it. It's going to be fun. I promise you. Anytime you have 10 communicators, about 40 different breakout sessions where you get systems like we do on this podcast, I promise you and your team, you'll be blessed for coming. It is our job to equip the church the best we know how so that the church can be better at what God's called us to do. So looking forward to seeing you. If you're here, that's coming up next week sometime, right?
That's right. The end of next week, it's climb-conference.com. We'll link that on our webpage. We'd love to have you join us. It's going to be a powerful time to grow as church leaders.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today, you guys. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some trends. As leaders, one of our responsibility is to make sure we can do our very best to see around the corner, to be proactive leaders, which is very difficult to do. We're not predicting the future, but we're trying to make sure there's nothing around there that will surprise us. So great leaders, I believe, are ones that don't make one move at a time, but you kind of plan with scenarios and looking for opportunities based on a plethora of things that might be around the corner. And so that's what we want to talk today. I want to give you about 8 of them, things that we think the Church of Jesus Christ should be passionate about, should be scenario planning about, should be legitimately looking at what is possible for the church as we look into the future. So Matt, take it away. What's this podcast called? What's the title?
Yeah, this podcast is called 8 Disruptive Trends for Black and Brown Churches in 2025.
We've never done this before, man.
I don't know if anybody's done this. So we're going to go for it. So we're going to talk about disruption and what to be ready for, and you're going to really want to download the notes because there is a lot of details, a lot of info that we're going to be giving to you, and we should just jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it. Come on.
Number 1 is a focus. One of the biggest things we got to do is a focus on the entire experience, not just the sermon. Not just the sermon. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, Barner has said that 1 in 3 millennials tell Barner that they often replace church attendance with other forms of Christian content. Part of the problem, I think, that we have in our current generation is that services have become so predictable. It's just been, you do 3 songs, then you do a sermon that has 3 points and 2 stories, and it's become so predictable. When you go to the movies, if something was that predictable, nobody would show up because they would know exactly what's going to happen. So I just believe that it's critical for the Church of Jesus Christ to focus on the entire experience and not just the sermon. A lot of churches have a tendency to make sure that the sermon is just great, and it needs to be, but it's a whole experience from start to finish, whether your service is an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half, or 2 hours, depending on whether you're brown or black. That can vary tremendously depending on your denomination as well. But our job now is to not just tell the worship leader or whoever's leading prayer, just do your thing and set me up for preaching. I think we've got to curate and we've got to process how can we tell a whole story with the entire hour and 15, 30, 2-hour experience. What are you thinking, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is the sermon anybody can find anywhere. Anybody can go to YouTube or Chat or Claude or Google Gemini, any AI tool, you can find any sermon you want. So if it's just about the sermon, odds are most preachers are going to be outdone by some really great preachers who all their content's online.
Absolutely.
So you're saying don't just focus on that piece because people can find that piece anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the whole experience when you, I mean, really, from when you come into the parking lot to the kids ministry, to the chair, to the worship, to how you do announcements and hosting, all the way to the sermon. It should be one complete experience.
Yeah, and just remember, we have 6 days to prepare for the next Sunday. And usually the pastor's doing a lot of work preparing for that. Usually, sometimes worship leaders doing a lot of work preparing for that. But how about crafting the whole experience? My concern is that the Church of Jesus Christ has become non-engaging. And because of that, we lose a lot of people who've said, I've done church, been there, done that, seen what you do, don't want any of it because it's so predictable, so germane, literally so boring that there's no reason for somebody to say, I cannot wait to get to the next Sunday so I can hear either the continuation of this series, or I can't wait to see what they're going to do in a creative element, or I can't wait to worship with the body of Christ together again. Mm-hmm. And there's so many other things you can do. For example, we've adopted this thing called a name tag weekend now, where we just want people to engage with each other so that we genuinely and authentically feel like a family, as opposed to it just being you come to church on your own, go back home, and nobody ever talks to you. So how do you create moments of engagement? How about starting the service with prayer, and just the first 10 minutes before church starts, it's just, if you need somebody to pray for you, you come on down and pray. I don't know what it is for you guys, but just make the whole experience one that's really unique and one that's really, really, really special.
That's good. It's easy to come to church, and you may have experienced this before and feel like the loneliest person in the room.
Absolutely.
If you're just there for the sermon, every person in the church can feel lonely. So every opportunity to connect and be intentional with what you do makes a huge difference.
It's just like this. It's just like you're saying, you don't come to church to say, here I am. You come to church to say, there you are. And our job is to figure out how do we, there you are, everybody. So the entire culture of your church is always looking to see who is God going to allow to sit beside you, and who do you have the best opportunity to minister to that's beside you, so they're not just waiting on the sermon, but the entire experience is a family experience, no matter how small or how large your church is. I just think we can do a much better job of crafting and creating a holistic experience, as opposed to the emphasis being on the sermon alone. Come on, somebody.
Okay, we're not gonna get off point one.
Okay.
Because when you say, you got to unpack when you say here I am, and instead you should say there you are. You're talking specifically about the pastor. Here I am, or the leader. Here I am.
Every person.
Look at me.
Right.
I'm going to put on a show.
Right.
I'm going to look the best. It's not here I am. Everybody, you can go down that path, but it's really how do we bless everybody else for being there?
Correct. Or just the person coming to church and they're saying, hey, man, here I am. Bless me. And we need to change that culture as a whole church to say, no, we're not just here for us. We're here to see how God can use us to bless somebody else. And making that normal, I think, is of paramount importance in our culture. And then asking and trying to figure out what can you do during the service to make that an experience again, so that it's not just I'm sitting passively, but how do you authentically engage people? Not just in the sermon saying amen, glory to God, hallelujah, come on, preacher. But it's how do you do that in the worship experience by the songs you choose? How do you do that in the creative part, if you do creatives in your service? But just the whole thing, trying to make sure that we are focused on the people in the seats and not just our creative juices, but the holistic experience.
Okay.
That all right?
That's good. Let's go to number 2.
Come on, let's see what we got.
Number 2 is singles and solo parents are forgotten.
My God, today. Now, I can say a lot about this. I believe, and I am convinced, that especially in the black and brown churches where the single rate is so very high, and that the single parents rate is so very high, I think there are too many pastors and too many ministry leaders that leave them out. I am convinced that they're the number one tool in God's arsenal, and I think that we should unleash singles and single parents to fulfill what God's called them to do. You know this, 1 Corinthians 7 already tells us that that singles have the space and the time to do things that married people can't. And I think too many of us preach only to marriage and not to the whole family, which include church family, that is, which includes singles and single parents. When we're doing a marriage series, we do way too much on the marriage side and way too little on the single mom side, on the single person side. So I think that we have a marriage problem because we have a dating problem, which is why I think we should be training, developing, and doing everything we can to prepare that generation for marriage. And then also to prepare them for some of them not getting married and what the reality of that looks like. I just think too many churches, because us as pastors get married really early, we don't even realize the tension and the pain that's there when you have waited for a long time, been faithful for a long time, seen some of your trifling friends for a long time get married, you not get married, and yet still we leave it as if it's not a big deal. And they are suffering and going to all manner of resources to either get their needs met or, oh, you can't see my face if you're not on YouTube, to get your needs met or not fulfill what God's called them to do. And I think it's our job to do our very best to prepare singles to live a life of contentment and to live a life of preparation so that the person that they're looking for, they're becoming like that person so they'll be able to connect with each other. I think it's huge. We think it's so huge that we have a Monday night Bible study for all our young adults to prepare them for the next season of their lives. And then we'll have a monthly digital experience for all our singles that I talk to them every single month because of how important I think this one is. Pastor Matt, what do you got?
I've got questions.
Yes, let's go.
Question number one for you is, the pastor listening, the church leader, we're doing a marriage series, a relationship series. How do you take a marriage series and include singles in it?
I think you don't have a choice, and you have to. Why? Because there's singles sitting in your audience. And if there's singles sitting in your audience, then you've got to minister to them, or else they'll just not go to church for that whole month while you're doing your marriage series, or however long that series takes. So I believe you've got to figure out how, even when I'm preaching to marriage, do I have and help or singles facilitate the process so that they will receive something from every sermon you give or every experience you give in that sermon series that you're doing, if you do sermon series. But I think it's huge. And I think your first message in every marriage series you do has to be for singles. There's some people that does one service just for singles, one service just for couples. That would be a great way to dissect it. Or there's some people that does half the messages for singles and half for couples, but you cannot practice pastoral malpractice by not ministering to the singles in your audience. It is vital for the singles that they need to know what it looks like to be a healthy single, loving God, making Jesus their best friend, and passionately serving him. I think it's massive.
That's good. Now, how do, let me ask you this. We can't make marriage the goal of life. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is, I think you would say, the Bible says that literally Jesus redefined what family is.
Oh, absolutely he did. 100%. So I believe, so personally, we believe we can prove it theologically that the single life is actually the preferred life. And so because of that, singles is a huge part of what we do. We believe you have to teach people the joy of waiting. If you don't find joy in waiting, that means you think your timing is better than God's timing. And I just believe every single church needs to prepare their body and their single congregation for dealing with contentment, dealing with the joy in waiting, dealing with loneliness, dealing with what to do if you never get married. I just think it's our job. And if we don't do it, somebody who doesn't value the text and the Bible will teach them why they need to go get what they need as opposed to wait on God. And I think that's extraordinarily dangerous. And because as people get to the age of 40, they get more desperate about marriage, then they start making bad decisions, and then the divorce rate goes up again because of people who are desperate that get married without being properly discipled, without being properly taught how to live and enjoy the season that God has called them to. And we got to watch that we don't make marriage the goal by celebrating everybody that's married and never celebrate anybody that's single, that's living for God and passionately serving Him with the rest of their lives. Make sense?
Let me ask you, what are the top 3 things when you hear churches refer to single adults that make you cringe? When they say or do this, it makes you cringe.
When they say things like, when you going to get married to a single person, I become unglued. When I hear they say, well, you're good looking, why you don't have a spouse yet? Or when they say stuff like, well, I mean, you better hurry up because you're not going to be able to have babies if you keep waiting around. And they're not challenging them on their spiritual life. They're not challenging them on getting closer to Jesus. They're not challenging them on being passionate about going somewhere else and serving Jesus. They're passionate about what America has made the goal, where the Bible has not made it the goal. Boy, I'm preaching now. Let's move on before I get into
There's more strategies in there. Let's go to number 3.
Let's go to number 3. What do we got?
Number 3 is how AI is going to impact the church.
My God, today. Now, I want to just briefly show you how this is going to change everything we do. Everybody in your congregation can already tell you where you get the sermon from if you're taking your sermon from somebody else. All they've got to do is say a couple of your points, and then AI will pick it up, and they'll already see it. Number 2, they'll be able to say, I want the best preacher you've ever heard, his thoughts on suffering, or his thoughts on tithing, or his thoughts or her thoughts on the blessing. And all of a sudden, it'll be their thoughts, everything they've ever thought on that topic right in front of them for them to read, which means ultimately there's going to come a time when they don't, why do I need to come to church? Which is why there's going to be the rise of this thing called self-directed spirituality, where they can not just hear one person's thoughts, but now they can hear a plethora of pastors' thoughts on any topic they want to hear, anytime they want to hear it, and drop it right in front of them. Which means it's another reason why number 1 is so important, which means that's why you don't just come to church for the sermon anymore. You come to church for the entire experience and to be a part of a family that you're a part of. So I just think AI is going to change. It's changing it already with how pastors use it to help them in sermon prep. It's changing already with the assistant that can help you with everything. And I just think churches are going to have to wrestle with this for years to come. The next 5 years are going to be life-altering for how people use AI to help, especially with tasks. And so now we're going to have to find different ways to engage volunteers. Now we're going to have to find different ways to engage staff people. There's staff people that won't need a job anymore, that we won't need them anymore because AI can do it and do it 24 hours a day. AI don't need any sleep. They can keep doing it forever. And so we've got to, again, look at what might be around the corner and then prepare ourselves for how we can take advantage of that now, which is why there should be people on your team right now that's running through every new thing that comes into AI and trying to figure out how to leverage that for the local church. It will be massive. It'll be a complete shift that we've got to address, and we need to prepare ourselves now by getting immersed in it to figure out what could come around the corner and how we can take advantage of that. Pastor Matt, just look at what it says here. Twitter took 2 years to reach 1 million users. Spotify took 5 months. Instagram took 2.5 months to reach 1 million users. ChatGPT, 5 days, and they got 1 million users. All I'm trying to tell you is everything goes exponentially faster when you get into AI and all it can do for us. Any thoughts, young man? What do you got?
I agree. Here's the other thing to think. AI in today's version is the worst it will ever be. It will only exponentially get better. With everything you talked about with content, but it's not just there as well. It's also voice recognition. You can create an AI voice model of what you do. It's also models of video and imagery. Graphic designers will you can use AI to create graphics that you need. If I had 10 pictures of you that I found on your social media, I could build an AI model of you, and I could create a picture of you doing anything I want of anybody. So it's kind of crazy and
that
scary.
Is crazy. I tell you, one of the things that we've started doing as a church, you've got to have passcodes now to recognize whether somebody's the real person or not, so that now within our executive team, there are now passcodes that you've got to know that has never been written anywhere, done anywhere, recorded anywhere, that you've got to be able to tell, so that if somebody's trying to impersonate me with my voice on a phone call or on any experience, now they have to know the passcode before our team will say, okay, yeah, that's legitimately you, because we believe that's coming around the corner, and it's not as far as you think it will be.
No. All right, number four. How many do we have?
Oh, gosh.
Okay, number 4, and this, you don't have a whole lot to say on this one. The lost art of volunteerism.
Oh, my gosh. Here we go. Here we go. The key to commitment is engagement, everybody. If you want people to be engaged and not just be your church, not just be a drive-by church, the key to it is, how do you get them engaged and involved? And the way to do that is through volunteering. But if you don't want to volunteer, and if you don't want to be engaged, and if you don't want to, if people are wasting your time by asking you too many questions, then you'll never value it enough to realize how powerful it is. Every person in your church has a spiritual gift, and you get to use yours every single week. If they're not using theirs, then it's your fault why you cannot get to your full redemptive potential. The only way to get to your full redemptive potential as a church is if everybody in that church is using their gifts for the advancement of the gospel at some level. And if they're not, it's nobody else's fault but yours, which is why we have to mobilize the army of God to do what God's called us to do. And whether they're doing stuff on their jobs and evangelizing on their jobs and have a strategy for every person on their jobs, that's absolutely incredible and fine. But every person, in addition to that, should be using their gifts to advance the kingdom ball forward through the local church at some level. And that's our job as communicators of the gospel of Jesus Christ, to not only make sure that they're saved, but also to make sure that they're using their gifts. Because every person in your church is a son and daughter of God. And every person in your church, if you're going to be a son and daughter of God, is a sent son and a sent daughter by God to your church and to their circle of influence. And as ministers of the gospel, we've got to get better at helping them navigate how best to do so. So I'm pretty excited about raising the level of volunteerism in churches all across the world. Really am.
Yeah, because your church right now has people who are experts in AI. You have engineers, you have content creators, you have social media experts, you have teachers, doctors, lawyers, partnered with spiritual gifts. Everything God wants to do in your church is right inside of your church. It's just finding them.
That's right. And the only way to find them is to have conversations with them. Only way to have conversations with them is to be present with them. We need to smell like sheep. People need to be able to have access to us, interact with us, so we can hear their story to see what God has been up to in their lives. We have not because we ask not. So oftentimes people spend more money hiring more staff instead of equipping volunteers to use their gifts for the advancement of the gospel. And that's a huge loss for the local church.
So now's not a good time for me to ask about that person I wanted to hire.
And that would not be a good time whatsoever.
Find a volunteer.
I promise you, they're out there and they're waiting and they're wondering, and they'll walk away from your church because they will think you don't need them.
And a volunteer can be more passionate than a paid employee.
Absolutely.
Every time.
Every time. Every single time. That's
all right,
awesome.
number five, focus on the 167 hours of your congregation. What is 167 all about?
So there are about 168 hours in a week. We're arguing that you should not just focus on that 1 hour, but try to ask and answer the question, how do we engage the body of Jesus Christ every day of the week? How do we prioritize and make Christ center of their lives every day of the week? One of the ways you do that is through discipleship, by just teaching people how to bring all of life under the lordship of Jesus Christ. But there are a myriad of other ways to do this. Some of the things we try to do here is we have a weekly morning prayer, where every single morning between 6:45 and 7:15, the whole church can get together if they want to and just go through the Word of God. Sometimes we take what we're doing on Sunday, or sometimes, like right now, we're going through a whole book as a church, and we walk through. Right now, we're doing the book When You Pray, and everybody in the morning prayers, every one of our pastors walk through what that book is and what the reading was for the day, and then we kind of walk through it. All we're trying to do is engaging people. Another thing we did was we took the sermon series we're currently doing, give everybody a journal for that sermon series, and then they get to write down their thoughts every single day based on the talk that we had last Sunday. Your job and my job is to figure out, how do we not make church one thing on the average person's checklist to do, but how do we bring all of life under the lordship of Jesus Christ? And it is our job as leaders to facilitate and invite people to not put Christ on the periphery of their lives, but to make him and put him in the center and keep him in the center every day long. And you do that by having rhythms that can perpetually, continuously remind people that he's supposed to be in the center of your life. So you do that with kids, you do that with students, you do that with adults. The goal is reclaiming that table to put the emphasis on discipling your own kids, your own family members every day of the week.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the win is beyond Sunday, and what you'll see in our notes is that content, first of all, you need to have good content, but then after you have good content in what you do, is it shareable? Is it easily packaged? And there's tools out there to help you with all of that. But how easy is it for somebody to share what you're doing on the weekend or throughout the week? How easy is it to click like, click share, to send an email, to send a text? So you want your content easily shareable, and you want it in shareable doses. You want a minute, a 6 or 7 minute, or a 10-minute clip that people can send out and share. And really, you just got to see of what we're doing, how much is sticking throughout the week. And that's how you know the 167 is working.
Yeah, and it's all trial and error. Sometimes the one thing's going to work, and then one thing won't work.
That's right.
And so you just got to try it and see if it works. The goal is you got to get your people in their word every day. And the question is, how do we do that? And how do we create rhythms that they can then make their own rhythms in their own lives to make sure Christ is at the center of their lives?
Yeah. Number 6 is leading your church, not just shepherding and feeding them. Leading your church, not just shepherding and feeding.
Let me tell you something. I can talk about this one all day, too. Far too often, the job of a senior leader is to lead, is to feed, is to raise the resources they need, and literally be present with their people. All right, so I think that a lot of people are great at feeding. A lot of people are great at coming alongside people and shepherding. Where I see our churches fail sometimes, especially in the black and the brown communities, is we're not leading them somewhere. Every single week, you should be leading your church somewhere. And you should be asked. Every leader is always in a season. And you need to know what season you're in and what season you're going to. And it's our job to know what season we're in this week and how we're moving the entire church to the next season for the next week. And it's your job to determine what's important and then drive that through the entire weekend experience so that they know, well, here's what's important, and here we go. And here's my role in what's important to our family and to our body of believers. I think it's huge. We need to do that more. So let me give you one example of what we do. Every weekend we ask, we're leading our church this weekend. Last weekend we're leading our church, and because the sermon series was in line with that, and it was to increase our volunteers again. And so we went after it, and we needed to have, our goal was to have a certain amount of volunteers. And so that's what we did. We drove it all the way through because we wanted more people engaged in our church, not just attending. And in order to do that, we had to put a card in everybody's chair. We had to put it online. We had to put it with our sermon notes. We had to send it out after church so that everybody, if they wanted to, had the opportunity to take their next step in volunteering. I believe every church should always have one of those every week where you're leading your church somewhere. Because if you're not, somebody will lead them. The question is, who will it be? And why not you?
That's good. We have a whole nother system just called lead something. But yeah, yeah, there's not a weekend that goes by, or most weekends, where we don't have a goal, where we're leading, or we have a next step, or there's something intentional. It's not just we're going to show up and do the same old. So churches need leaders, and that's biblical, Pastor. That's Moses and Jethro and him guiding Moses on it. It's not what you're doing is not okay. You need a way to scale what you're doing.
Absolutely. And you can't do it all by yourself, which is why you need other people to help you pull it off. The problem is sometimes we're afraid of inconveniencing people when they have been sent by God on assignment to do something, and it's our job to equip them to do that. And I think too many pastors lean away from that instead of leaning toward it.
Okay, we better go to the next one because we can get going on that one too. Number 7 is reclaiming the table and discipleship.
My God, today. Yes, I think we have gone way away from the table being the place where dad teaches the family spiritually, where dad reinforces kingdom values in the family. We've gone far away from the significance of discipleship and 1-on-1 or 1-on-5 or 1-on-10 or 1-on-12, whatever it is, where people are being discipled regularly in church. We know what the Great Commission says. We know Jesus modeled it for us, but because it's messy, because it takes a long time, because it's not over tomorrow, then we have cowered away from it because we have never been discipled. We don't know how to disciple other people. So there are lots of reasons why people don't do it. However, it is the Great Commission that God's called us to do. So everybody should have it. The question we ask in our church oftentimes is, man, who are your men? Who are you hanging with? Or who are your women? Who are you hanging with? But everybody should regularly be discipling and pouring in somebody else and modeling the way for them. So all discipleship is how does an individual bring all of life under the lordship of Christ and allow the thinking and the thoughts of Jesus to guide their lives and not the culture to guide it. And so for us, we go through the Gospel of Mark. We walk through all the chapters, let somebody else do some of the chapters so they know what to do, and then we release them to go and disciple other people themselves. But it is a lost art. It is far becoming too rare in church to see people who have been discipled, which means on Sunday morning, you're talking to an audience that's been discipled by the culture all week long, and all you have is 1 hour to pour into them and counteract what the culture has been doing every single day of that week. It just won't work unless you bring people closer to you, hang out with them in your house, let them see how you do life so that they can see what a believer looks like when they are bringing all of life under the lordship of Jesus Christ. I think it's vital. I think we've lost it, and we need to reclaim the influence of the table for your family and of discipleship for the broader church.
That's good. That's really good. Let's bring it home with number 8. This one's a little unique. The rising need for church court. What in the world is a church court? What are you talking about here?
I love it. Church court simply is where 1 Corinthians chapter 5 tells us that when there are disputes in the family of God, that there should be a venue in which people that have disputes can resolve those disputes in the local church instead of spending thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in courts and with fancy lawyers trying to get what they think they truly deserve. And I believe it is the church's job, because it's biblical, but 2, because it will help resolve relational problems that people have. So whether it's you want a divorce, we believe that that you went to the church to get married, but you go to the courthouse downtown to get a divorce. We believe that if you went to the church to get married, or anywhere you go to get married, and you said, till death do us part before God, that you can't give yourself a divorce, you should be one of those people that then go back to the church to ask them if they can give you a bill of divorce, just like the Bible teaches us we should. And there has to be a mechanism in which that takes place so that people can come and people can hear their views on why they think they deserve a divorce, for example, and godly men and women can hear it and then go back to the word, see if there's an alignment, and if there isn't, then they tell them you don't have a bill of divorce. At least the church is not writing you one. Or if there are disputes where there's somebody renting a house, one member renting a house from another member, and something goes down, then they should be able to come to the church, and that church should be able to say, all right, let's hear this case, hear the case, and then be able to resolve it. And we've seen it happen numerous times in our church where, especially that last one, totally, where somebody was a landlord, somebody was a tenant, wouldn't work out, didn't have the money to pay, and then they worked it out, they moved out of the house, and now they're on a payment plan to pay them back over time, but it didn't have to go to the courthouse, they didn't have to go through litigation of any sort, and it was resolved within the church. I believe the more you try to become a family as a church, the more disputes will arise. And instead of people walking away with church hurt, I believe it is the church's job to then hear that case, figure out how to respond to it theologically, biblically, and then render decisions that both of them agreed that they would abide by before going to church court. I think it's huge. I think it's biblical. I think it is and should be normative in every church, no matter what.
Yeah, and the Church of Jesus Christ shines when we're able to resolve our conflicts.
100%.
When we're able to make peace, not break peace, not fake peace, but make it in the church, Jesus is able to shine.
And I think the number one enemy of the church is disunity, and all of these issues are disunifying issues. And so what does the devil do? He tries to attack marriages because it's a unified, anything that looks like God he attacks, or he attacks the church. And so these are the two areas, and if you don't have a mechanism to deal with it, then he'll have a field day in marriages and in churches as well.
That's good. Well, we've now covered the 8 disruptive trends. Any final thoughts about what this year holds and what you're excited about?
Well, I just think as leaders, as I said in the start, we must be able to look around the corner. We must come up with scenarios of potential things that could happen in our culture that will affect the church. And in order to do that, you've got to get out of the day-to-day of the church and work on it, not in it, so that you can have time to think and process what are some things that might happen and how might we adjust, interact based on what's going to happen. I think that should be a practice that we make normal for leadership teams, for elder teams, for deacon teams, so that we're trying to process how might we handle things before they just show up at our front doors, and then we are ill-prepared to deal with them. So it is a joy to sit and anticipate, predict, proactively dream about what might happen, and then figure out how we can either proactively prevent it or be ready to deal with it when it shows up. And you and I should make that a normal part of our weekly or monthly rhythms to deal with whatever the culture might throw to us. What a joy that we get to lead the people of God in these areas. Corporate America is doing it, and so why shouldn't the church lead the way in doing it? Not just be responsive, but be proactive.
So I want to ask you right now to go online and download. We've got everything we just talked through where you can walk through this with your team, see which ones might be the biggest for you. Visit 1cc.com/leadership roundtable. It's all right there. If you've never reviewed us or shared, we'd love to hear your thoughts on how this podcast is helping you. You can do that wherever you listen. And before we leave today, Pastor, we've got January 23rd, 24th, 25th, again, Climb Leadership Conference. These are the kind of things we're going to be talking about.
Every last one. These are the kind of systems that you'll get. Everybody, whatever part of your team it is, they're going to get one of these. And I promise you, they will leave here equipped and resourced, and they will learn more in these 3 days than they normally do in a year. At least that's what happens when our team goes somewhere. And we'll learn more in 3 days than we will learn in a year. So we encourage you, if you have not yet, then you might want to jump online and see if you can be a part of it that way as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. Pastor Conway, thank you for leading us today. We're grateful, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. And it's going to be a great time as we go throughout this year. So God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Blessings to you.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It has been an honor to have you here with us. Now, just want to remind you that all of the resources we talked about today are available online at visit1cc.com/Leadership Roundtable. Now, if this has been helpful, leave us a review, go out there and hit subscribe, and more importantly, share this with your team so that everybody can grow. We can't wait to see you next time.